A good majority of the people who are watching this channel probably already know a decent amount about this election, but that's not going to deter you from watching a video about it anyways. And if you don't know about this election, well, then this is going to be a good way for you to learn about it, because despite how overused this phrasing is, I find it very interesting. First, let's set the scene. California, being the Republican stronghold, had a Republican governor by the name of James Rolfe, the angriest governor you've ever heard, even more so on June 2nd, 1934. What made him so mad on that day? Well, he died and wasn't able to run for a second term. His lieutenant governor, Frank Merriam, was sworn in to be the replacement for him and made it clear that he intended to run for a full term. However, some Republicans were not satisfied with Merriam because Merriam represented the more conservative wing of the GOP at the time, and not the progressive wing. As such, two people from said progressive wing decided to challenge him, lawyer Raymond L. Haight and former governor Clement C. Young. However, incumbency has its benefits, and Merriam easily won the Republican nomination, and even the Prohibition nomination to boot. However, there was one group that he probably needed the endorsement of that he didn't gain, the Progressive Party, which for those who don't know, was still kicking around in California thanks to Hiram Johnson. The Progressive Party decided to back Haight instead, so put a pin in him for later. However, this is one side of the aisle. Why don't we flip to the other side of the aisle to see what's going on over there? While the Democratic primary was a bit more packed than the Republican one, only two candidates were really worth noting. Former head of the Committee of Public Information, George Creel, and perennial socialist candidate and author most famous for his expose of the meatpacking industry, Upton Sinclair. Now, for those who don't know, Upton Sinclair had actually already run for office in California a couple of times, albeit under the Socialist Party. So why the sudden flip? We don't even have to put it into words, we can put it into letters. FDR. FDR's successful 1932 presidential run and the New Deal inspired Sinclair to basically do that, but for socialism and on a smaller scale, creating a plan called End Poverty in California, or EPIC, which called for massive public works program guaranteeing jobs to everybody, state control of factories, sweeping tax reforms, and guaranteed pensions. Now, despite the fact that Sinclair was way more famous than Creel, all things considered, given the fact that the jungle is basically in US textbooks now, he was at an, of course, notable disadvantage given the fact that he was a socialist. Many California Democrats, like William Gibbs McAdoo, backing Creel. However, Sinclair had an interesting idea to counteract the very obvious disadvantages he had. Get the average Californian to back him by explaining his platform to them. He didn't need to run on, oh, I'm a socialist. He could run on, here's what I plan to do for you. And this wasn't a one-man job. No. This was a movement. He planned to run a ton of down-the-ballot candidates to try and help him get his epic platform passed. And lo and behold, in an upset that is still notable to this day, Sinclair somehow won. Now, the primaries were simple. The general election is where things get a little bit more complicated. All of the complications center around Sinclair. Well, okay, mostly people's reaction to Sinclair. First came from the left, because while majority of the left was backing Sinclair wholeheartedly, there were some people who were not too enthused. The California Socialist Party and the California Communist Party. To the Communist Party, Sinclair was pretty much a capitalist, so they didn't care. They were just like, pfft, who cares? Sinclair finally admits it. And we're already going to nominate their own candidate, Sam Darcy. But the Socialists had a little bit of a more sad reaction. You see, despite all the hard work that Sinclair had put into the Socialist Party, they felt betrayed by him leaving to go with the Democrats. Not only did they kick him out, but they also kicked out every single socialist that wanted to support Sinclair's candidacy, and of course nominated their own person, former socialist congressional candidate Milan C. Dempster. However, that was a huge mistake for the California Socialists because that basically kicked out every single member of their party. However, the left's reaction to Sinclair was basically nothing. It was the right side of the aisle that had a more vocal reaction to Sinclair, and it wasn't even just the Republicans. Even Democrats hated Sinclair and refused to back him, either flat out endorsing Merriam over Sinclair or trying in desperate vain to get Sinclair to drop out and instead back Raymond Height's candidacy, because Height had essentially positioned himself as the, oh, Sinclair's the radical socialist, Miriam's the radical Republican, I'm sort of the not left, not right forward guy. In fact, FDR actually stayed out of the race because he felt that Sinclair was way too radical for him to back. However, Sinclair's biggest opponents, California media studio heads, such as MGM studio head Louis B. Mayer, LA Times publisher Harry Chandler, and media tycoon William Randolph Hearst, who had decided to team up with the Miriam campaign to launch a massive Stop Sinclair movement to counteract the Epic movement. Would they mimic Sinclair and go to the people and try to get them on their side through explaining their policies and explaining things through a very decent and concise manner? Close. They went to the people, but they did it through massive propaganda campaigns, basically doing everything they could to make Sinclair look bad and Miriam look good, essentially doing puff pieces for Miriam, hyping up Haight, and doing everything they could to make Sinclair look terrible. One of the most notable ways they did this was through film reels, because as we all know, the media is what reigns supreme in California. The most notable one is The Inquiring Cameraman, where supposedly a man with a camera went to random California voters and basically said, who are you going to vote for and why? Now, at first glance, you might say, well, this is an interesting timepiece. The fact that this piece of media of basically campaign reporting of this size, of this caliber, is actually really impressive that it stayed around for this long. However, as you watch the film, you start realizing some patterns. Let's look at some Frank Miriam supporters. Now let's look at the Upton Sinclair supporters. Notice something interesting? The Sinclair supporters are mostly portrayed by the undesirables, greasers, people with no teeth, people who are poor, whatever. Meanwhile, the Sinclair supporters are well-dressed, model minority, hard-working, parents, and they're all able to explain their points really well. Again, on the surface, you might say, oh, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, yeah, when I first saw it, I thought it was just a natural given. Of course, people who are more well-off would be supportive of Miriam, and people who are less well-off would probably support Sinclair. However, there's some choice clips that make it apparent that maybe this isn't as real as we think it is.
Do you really believe that he can end poverty in California?
Well, no, I don't think so, but well, I don't know what to say about that.
I was born and reared a Democrat, but years later I became a Republican, and then a socialist. And but when Mr. Sinclair declared himself candidate for governor of California, we went in to help in that movement.
Because I believe he's the best man for the job. I've always been a socialist, and I believe he will do the best for the people, for the working, especially for the working people, and even for the rich.
I'm going to vote for Upton St. Clair.
Will you tell us why?
Upton St. Clair is the author of the Russian government, and it worked out very well there, and I think it should do here.
Even if you're still convinced that this is real, come on, they chose that last clip for a reason. But let's be real, doubt of the authenticity. In fact, some modern-day outlets have basically concluded that, yes, this is 100% fake, and they can actually identify some of the actors inside of this film reel. But since this was before any sort of fact-checking was a thing, unfortunately, it kinda worked, and Sinclair was basically doomed from the start. Miriam getting nearly 50, Sinclair being 11 points behind, and Haight getting a pretty decent third, all things considered. However, this didn't deter Sinclair. In fact, he actually took this in stride. Not only did he do way better than he did previously, many of the people who ran on his epic platform actually did manage to win. Sinclair taking very extreme note of that, saying, "The American people will take socialism, but they won't take the label." Man, I sure hope a future governor doesn't bastardize this quote and misattribute it to someone else. So yeah, that's a video on one of Upton Sinclair's biggest accomplishments, getting second place in a race that he was probably doomed from to begin with. definitely a lot less notable than his massive expose that literally changed how an entire industry was ran. Such an interesting book. I wonder if they made a movie out of it. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.